Michael DiStefano of Locked On Leafs accompanies me on today's episode to talk all things Sheldon Keefe, and also let's catch up on some signings that the Devils made throughout the month of May, including Sheamus Casey. What will his role be with this organization going forward? We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed it. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils Rider of Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. Today's episode is mostly going to consist of me interacting with one of my colleagues over here at Locked On, and that is Michael DiStefano, the co-host of Locked On Leafs. Michael will give his perspective on Sheldon Keefe and paint a picture as to what went wrong towards the end of his tenure and what New Jersey Devils fans can expect from him moving forward. But before I bring in Michael, I want to go over some signings made by the Devils throughout the month of May. We obviously know the big one in Curtis McDermott re-signing to a 3-year extension, but the Devils signed a lot of young guns that I don't think a lot of people are talking about, with the main one being Sheamus Casey. We'll talk about Sheamus Casey momentarily, but to catch everybody up, Jacob Malik was signed to a 2-year entry-level contract. Max Willman was re-signed as well. Nathan Legare was re-signed. Brian Hallinan was signed to a 2-year, two-way contract. Samuel LaBerge, 1-year, two-way. And Sheamus Casey, a highly touted defenseman from the University of Michigan, signed his entry-level contract earlier this month. Sheamus Casey had a big performance for the Wolverines. He recorded 45 points, 7 goals, 38 assists in 39 games. He led all Michigan defensemen in scoring, and his 45 points ranked 5th on the team. During the 2023-2024 season, he earned all Big Ten first-team honors, was a finalist for the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, and was named to both Big Ten All-Tournament and NCAA All-Regional teams. Following the end of the season, Casey was named an American Hockey Coaches Association All-American. His 45 points ranked 3rd for all NCAA Blue Liners. And remember, the Wolverines made it to the Frozen Four once again. Sheamus Casey is an interesting prospect for the Devils because when we look at the defensemen that are already on the roster, there's a decent amount of players that are signed long-term. Dougie Hamilton is signed long-term. Jonas Siegenthaler, John Marino, Kevin Ball, and Luke Hughes both have 1 year remaining before they become restricted free agents. Believe it or not, it feels like just yesterday that the Devils signed Luke Hughes to his entry-level contract. Brendan Smith is currently a UFA. Nick DeSimone, UFA. And Simon Nemetz is going to enter year 2 of his entry-level contract. Basically, there's a decent amount of defensemen that are signed long-term, and it raises the important question. What role is Sheamus Casey going to have with the Devils moving forward? Because I just listed some of the players that are signed long-term, including Marino, Siegenthaler, and Hamilton, and Nemetz and Hughes are going to take priority over Casey. Casey is a dynamic player. I had the chance to watch him up close and personal during development camp, and what I noticed from Casey was that he was not afraid to join in on the rush. He was not afraid to be a playmaker, and he's pretty quick, if you ask me. And I just told you his numbers while playing for the Wolverines. He's a really good player. And I've actually had this debate with Jersey Joe of Draft Pro Hockey. What should the Devils do with Casey? Because I don't see a role for him because all 6 of the defensive positions are going to be locked up. Because Hamilton's coming back. Marino, Siegenthaler, Ball, Nemetz, Hughes, and possibly another defenseman because that's also going to be a target for Tom Fitzgerald this offseason. So I'm not really seeing what the future plan is for Casey. And if the Devils want to involve him in trade discussions, I'd say be very careful about that because I still think that Casey can be a valuable asset. But I'm going to say something, and this might be a hot take. I think you really have to entertain the idea of possibly converting Sheamus Casey to a forward because I just told you what he did at development camp. He's not the typical defenseman, and in the modern NHL, we definitely praise more offense from defensemen. You don't really see too many stay-at-home defensemen getting much love or support around the league. That's why usually the best offensive-minded defenseman will win the Norris Trophy. Case in point with Erik Karlsson, because Karlsson is a turnover machine, but yet he won the Norris last year. And who's going to win the Norris this year? My money's on Quinn Hughes. And I don't hear too many people rave about Quinn Hughes' defense, more about his playmaking and also his ability to get into the scoring column by racking up the points. And I think Cale Makar is the same way. Cale Makar is often regarded as one of the best defensemen in the modern NHL. In fact, I think I've heard NHL personalities, including PK Subban, say that Cale Makar can go down as one of the best defensemen to ever play the game based on how his career is turning out to be. One of, not the, just for clarification. But Sheamus Casey deserves a chance, but I just don't see a role defensively for him. And if he is added to the Devils' blue line, it actually creates more issues, if you ask me, because one of the problems that the Devils had last season was they were very inexperienced on their blue line because you had Nemitz, you had Hughes, who don't have that much NHL experience, and both were playing in their rookie years. And Dougie Hamilton, he's not the best defensively. Jonas Siegenthaler, John Marino, Kevin Ball, they didn't exactly hold down the fort defensively this season compared to last season. I think you got to entertain the possibility of converting Sheamus Casey to a forward, but that's my 2-cent opinion. And it's not my final decision. It's just like, maybe you just see how that goes, because I do want to see Sheamus Casey succeed, but at the same time, I don't want to just use him as a trade pawn. I think he's a very valuable asset, but let me know what you guys think. What do you think the Devils should do with Sheamus Casey? Because he had a big year for the Michigan Wolverines, and he now signed his entry-level contract. But what role should he play with the Devils? And before we bring in Michael DiStefano of Locked On Leafs, let me tell you guys about Indeed, because I think the Devils found Sheldon Keefe on Indeed. Indeed is a hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, Indeed's a powerful hiring platform that can help you do it all. With Instant Match, over 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job, according to Indeed Data US. One of the things I like about Indeed is that it makes hiring all in one place so easy. I've actually used Indeed before to book myself some play-by-play gigs, and I'm still associated with the company that employs me to this day. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer good for a limited time. Claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/lockedon. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Okay, it's time to bring in Michael DiStefano of Locked On Leafs to talk all things Sheldon Keefe. Take it away. All right, I'm joined alongside one of the co-hosts of Locked On Leafs, Michael DiStefano. He also does work for TSN, the Hockey News, and also covers. Michael, how you doing?
Doing well, Trey. Doing well. Just enjoying the playoff hockey that's going on. Wish my team was still in it. I'm sure you're the same way, but still lots of great hockey to be watching these days.
Absolutely, and for Devils discourse, anyone but Rangers. That's the mindset that I think a lot of people have. But you're here to talk all things Sheldon Keefe and give your thoughts as to what went wrong in Toronto and was this a good pickup for New Jersey? To start off, just tell us your overall thoughts on Sheldon Keefe, what his tenure was like in Toronto, because he's been in the Toronto system for a good while with the Marlies and then being promoted in 2019. And I would say he had a productive 5 years behind the bench.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. He had a very productive 5 years. I mean, you look at a team that set Leaf records year after year. 3 straight 100-point seasons under Sheldon Keefe. They set the all-time Leafs record with I think it was 111 points or something like that with Sheldon Keefe a few years ago. They won a division title that year that it was the Canadian division, and they've made the playoffs every single year that he was there. So there's a lot of success under Keefe. There's a lot that Leaf fans should be happy with. The unfortunate part in the legacy that he's always going to have here in Toronto is, he was never able to get the team over the hump and win the playoffs, right? Like you look at it, they had one series win throughout the duration of his tenure here. That obviously extends way further. Where they've only had one series win in the last 20 years. But that is kind of the problem is, they needed a new voice in Toronto. And that's what the GM, Brad Treliving, came out and said when he announced that they were relieving Sheldon Keefe of his duties, that they simply just needed a new voice. And they've got that now in Craig Berube. But I'll be honest with you, like I thought Sheldon Keefe did a really good job coaching this team this year. This is one of his best coaching jobs as a whole. I think you'll notice that Sheldon Keefe is not shy to mix up the lines like mid-game. Like this dude brings out the blender more than anyone else that I've seen. Like he loves to make himself a nice lineup cocktail mid-game. Like it's insane. But honestly, it often works out. It really, really does. So, I think Sheldon Keefe is a really, really solid coach. I think he'll go on to do good things. I think the Devils were a solid landing spot. Obviously, he knows how to cultivate talent. He was able to get the best out of, Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews, William Nylander. So I look at the talent that they have in New Jersey, and he should be able to get that out of guys like Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, and such. So I think that it was a really good hire and a really good fit for both sides between Keefe and the Devils.
Now, I want to ask you this. You talked about why the front office decided to move on from Sheldon Keefe, but I want to hear your personal opinion. Do you think it was justified to try to find a new voice? Because my thing is, like, from an outside perspective, you talked about how he never really got the team over the hump, but the Maple Leafs went to the second round of the playoffs last year for the first time since 2004. And they lost to the eventual Eastern Conference champion Florida Panthers. That should say a lot, in my opinion. And not only that, you mentioned the core four, Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, William Nylander, John Tavares. They all saw decent offensive production. And Austin Matthews is a superstar in this league. Mm-hmm. I personally, from an outside perspective, don't think it was fair to relieve him of his duties, considering the fact that he saw a lot of success, but he's like the chef and he has to work with what the ingredients he's been given, because I don't think it's on him that sometimes the Maple Leafs, their defense and their goaltending can be anywhere from decent to shaky. And I'm just speaking on experience myself, because the Devils are sort of in that same situation where they have a very inexperienced blue line and their goaltending was anywhere from mediocre to putrid. Yeah. I just want to get your thoughts. Do you think it was justified to move on from Sheldon Keefe? Because from an outside perspective, I think he did really well.
Yeah, I think in a vacuum, no. I think Keefe probably, if you just look at this season as a whole, did he do enough where, if there wasn't this long history, would he have remained as coach of the Maple Leafs? Probably. I think that's fair to say, especially when you look at the turnaround that this team ended up making in Game 5 against Boston, and Game 5, 6, and 7. Like they were great. They were tight. They played with structure. They played defensively. The biggest issue, though, Trey, and ultimately the reason why he's gone, is because the same problems were persisting year after year come playoff time. And I think that's the issue. It's like, well, if this coach can't change it, then we need someone else to come in and do that. And the two issues, this would shock people who, don't pay attention to what's going on in Toronto. The two issues that the Leafs had in the playoffs was not goaltending. It was not defense. It was goal scoring. It was their offense. 13 of the last 14 playoff games, they've recorded 2 or less goals. They couldn't find a way to score in the playoffs. And that's the biggest issue that this team had. If you go and look at the goals against average right now in the NHL, do you know who's up there at number 1 through the playoffs? Joseph Woll. Joseph Woll had the best goals against average in the National Hockey League in the couple. I know it's only a small sample size, only played 2 games, but like that just goes to show that goal scoring was their issue. And that's always been the case, unfortunately, for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And so I think that's the biggest reason why they wanted to make a change. Special teams also was a big problem. Their power play has always lacked come playoff time. So I think those 2 reasons in particular is kind of what, those problems continue to persist year after year after year. And that's ultimately, I think, why they decided to go in a different direction. Because if they didn't get fixed after a couple of games last year, they didn't get fixed at all throughout this playoff series. I mean, how many times can you really go at it with this exact same core, run it back, and continue to kind of waste and burn years? I think when you look at the history of what's gone on here in Toronto in the last few years, come playoff time in particular, regular season, hey, this is one of the best regular season teams we've ever seen. Like, they're just prolific every single year. Come playoffs, though, have not been able to really get the job done. And unfortunately, it cost Sheldon his job.
Yeah, so you talked about the regular season success, and the Maple Leafs, they set a franchise record with 54 wins and 115 points, while also winning 50-plus games in consecutive years from 2021 to 2023. And his teams never registered a points percentage lower than .622 in any of those seasons. And the power play is something else you talked about. They finished first in the NHL in the 2021-2022 season, which also set a Toronto franchise record. And I want to highlight that a little bit because I think Sheldon Keefe does deserve his roses in that regard. But just to shift it to a more positive tone, you talked about what the ultimate downfall was. What do you think are some of the strengths that Sheldon Keefe possesses that can give the Devils discourse some hope here? Because I think a lot of people wanted Craig Berube behind the bench. Ultimately, he lands in Toronto, and that's the mecca of hockey, and I think that was his dream job. But I said it in a couple prior episodes that I like Sheldon Keefe and what he brings to the roster, and I think he is given another core four to work with in New Jersey. The front office just has to make a few changes. But your perspective, what are some of the strengths from Sheldon Keefe?
Well, so I've spoken to a few people who've played under Sheldon Keefe, and they've told me that he's an ultimate communicator. Communication is really big with him. He's very easy when it comes to relaying what he wants out of his group, so that's always a positive. So communication is key for him. And I kind of touched on it earlier, but when it comes to mixing things up, when it comes to in-game adjustments, he's really good at that. Like, he can go from period to period, go into his little coach's room and say, all right, this is what happened. This is how we're going to change it. We're going to mix up these lines, and then this is going to be their role. This is what we're going to do. And then they look like a completely different hockey team coming out into the second period. They do it all the time. So I would say, like, his in-game adjustments are really, really solid. He really has a knack and knows what buttons to press, what moves to kind of do at what point, and they tend to work. And then communication, I think, is another big thing, which, you would think, okay, well, if he was so good at communicating, how come the message couldn't get through to the big boys and, during the playoffs? That's a good question. It's one that I think everyone's still asking themselves, one that Sheldon's probably still asking themselves, because I don't think it was the message that was bad, or it was the play style or system that was bad. It was just not getting through. And I think it was really evident to me in game 5, 6, and 7 of the playoffs against Boston, when the team finally started to play with structure. They finally started to play the system, and they started to play the way that Sheldon Keefe wanted them to. They looked like a great hockey team. They ran into a hot goaltender, Jeremy Swayman, and they couldn't get pucks in the back of the net. But in terms of how it looked like a playoff team. So I think as long as the Devils buy in to what Sheldon is selling, I think they'll be in a pretty good spot. And find themselves back in the postseason next year.
I think being adaptable is important for any coach because you mentioned it before. Games 5 and 6, Austin Matthews, the superstar player, not out there. And yet the Leafs found a way to win, and they almost pulled off the improbable comeback and having the Boston Bruins blow a 3-1 lead in back-to-back years. Ultimately, David Pastrnak put the game to bed in overtime. And this sort of leads to my final question, and you're probably asked this often, and sorry if I'm beating a dead horse, but why do the Maple Leafs continue to get knocked out in the first round with all the talent that they have? I know in the early 2010s period, it was about getting to the playoffs, but now it's just like getting over that hump. Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel? Because some decisions might need to be made during the offseason.
Yeah, I mean, I there's still light, I suppose. I mean, you look, they've got a very talented squad and a team that certainly, from the looks of it, should be a squad that can make it out of the first round year after year. But for whatever reason, the two things that continue to persist this team is one, their inability to score come playoff time. Oftentimes you got to score goals by going to the net, right? And a lot of their guys kind of stay perimeter too much sometimes. So, that's one problem is playoff scoring. And then the other is special teams. You look at their special teams this year in the playoffs, their power play was 4%, Trey. 4%, 1 for 21. It was disgusting what was happening with that power play. And the penalty kill wasn't that much better. I think the penalty kill was in like the high 60s. So special teams have like often plagued this team come playoff time, and then just the lack of goal scoring has been a big issue. And it's a lack of goal scoring from the big boys. Like that's the biggest concern, is that guys like Mitch Marner, guys like John Tavares, Austin Matthews, like have been very quiet come playoff time. Like Marner had 3 points in 7 games in this playoffs. Guys paid $11 million. You gotta have more than 3 points, my guy. Like that's the biggest issue. And when you look at it and they're losing every game by like 1 goal, like the margins are tight. If he cashes in on an extra goal or sets up an extra goal here and there, completely different series. You know what I mean? So those have been the issues that have plagued the Toronto Maple Leafs. So, when it comes to is there light at the end of the tunnel? Yeah, there's got to be. Like you look at, they've changed the coach. There's thoughts they might make an on-ice change-up. I know there's a lot of rumors out there about Mitch Marner. And, hey, silly season's coming up, Trey. Who knows? We might be able to come up with something. Maybe Keefe and Marner could get reunited. We could go through that at some point in the summer. But I think at some point, I mean, Leaf fans have to hope that the Maple Leafs, break through and don't completely waste this Austin Matthews era here and finally make some sort of deep run. Craig Berube's been there. He knows what it takes. Hopefully the team can buy into what he's selling, and Berube can take this team over the top.
Actually, I already did a silly season episode surrounding Marner because there was an article put out there by Bleacher Report of a few trade packages for Marner, and it consisted of John Marino and the Devils' first-round draft pick in next year's draft for Mitch Marner. Personally, Mitch Marner is a good player, but he doesn't fill a need for the Devils. Like, offense is not the Devils' problem. They need better defense, and they need better goaltending. They kind of already have a bona fide scorer who can sometimes be red hot, but as proven in the playoffs, sometimes if you suppress them, then they're a no-show. Jesper Bratt was sort of that player in last year's playoffs for the Devils, and there's no guarantee that he'll re-sign long-term with the Devils if brought here. That's a huge risk, and the Devils have a lot of contracts to fill, from Dawson Mercer, Simo Nemetz, Luke Hughes, and it would just create a lot of chaos. But I personally think the Maple Leafs should move on from Mitch Marner to get more defense because offense, similar to the Devils, is not really their problem. You still got Austin Matthews, you still got William Nylander, and you still got John Tavares. Get grittier defense, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that's an opinion that a lot of Leaf fans share as well. But he's got a no movement clause, so whatever trade does kind of happen, he's got to okay. And I mean, any team trading for Mitch Marner's probably going to want an extension in place as well. So
or to retain half of the salary,
which is not going to happen.
Yeah,
Not going to happen. Like maybe there's another team that'll take on that money just because. But certainly the Leafs aren't in the business of doing that. They're looking to move his salary so they can replace it with other good players, not keep it on the books as dead cap. So yeah, it's going to be a very interesting offseason here in Toronto.
Well, I wish you the best. And Craig Berube, known for being a drill sergeant, but he has championship pedigree.
Yep.
And he turned a hopeless team into champions. That's why he was actually my top choice. But Sheldon Keefe, he was a close second. And now let's see what both the Devils and the Leafs can do. Michael, I want to thank you for taking the time out your day to come on and discuss Sheldon Keefe. Where can my audience find you?
Yeah, I mean, you could find me talking Leafs every day over at the Locked On Leafs podcast, wherever you get your podcast, and up on YouTube. You can find me also on Twitter, or X as it's now called, at Mickey_Canuck. Lots of hockey talk throughout the duration of the playoffs. You can go find me there as well.
Awesome. And like I do to close out every episode, continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.